It's like we're stuck. You know, like a needle on a scratch record.
It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
It's a thing where the same day keeps happening?
I wake up every day right here, right in Punxsutawney, and it's always February 2nd.
Time. I promise to explain everything later, but I need you to trust me.
Slow down! What are you, in a damn time loop or something?
Groundhog Day Project blog, day 69.
69, dudes!
Insert Bill and Ted. Dated 9th October 2013. I don't even have to floss. Phil Connors can't get fat. He doesn't have to exercise. He can veg out and do nothing at all. Hell, he does this at one point in the film when we see him sitting around watching Jeopardy with the old people at the bed and breakfast, a big bowl of popcorn in his lap, a bottle of booze close at hand. I thought of this tonight when my dinner options were limited. Let me explain two details. First, I've been a vegetarian for a bit more than a year now, so my options when out are fairly limited sometimes anyway. On the college campus, there aren't many meal options for a vegetarian. There are some good sides at a few places, but not much else. Second, or rather first and a half, just so you know, I didn't become a vegetarian for health reasons, but I think it's had a positive effect on my health. Actual second, night classes, like those in the master's program, are scheduled 6:10 to 10 o'clock at my school. And food places on campus are all closed by 8. So teachers will have a break around 7:30 to give students a chance to grab some food. Thing is, lately, there aren't many food options at 7:30. Only 3 places open tonight, El Pollo Loco, Carl's Jr., and Sbarro. Only vegetarian options at those first 2 are fries, and I figured if I'm going to buy something oily, I might as well get pizza. More substance to it. It's not exactly good for me, especially Sbarro's pizza, but it's vegetarian, and it's filling. So then I'm eating my slice of veggie pizza, and it occurs to me Phil doesn't have this problem. He's lucky, he's in relatively good shape. I mean, Bill Murray and by extension Phil Connors is far from an Adonis, but he's fit enough we can buy that, say, women would be interested even if he wasn't also charming and funny. If he was out of shape, like, say, Gus, the movie would be quite different. He could probably still steal all the money, but he might not be able to get the costume he wants. Of course, that makes me wonder if it matters that Phil dresses up like Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. I mean, it allows for a nice musical beat. Giving us that little bit of music from the good, the bad, and the ugly, which makes the costume scene stand out even more as something unique and eccentric. A singular example of the adolescent phase of Phil's time loop, even without the robbery or Nancy or the car chase with Gus and Ralph. But I wonder if the Clint Eastwood bit doesn't serve some larger function in relation to, say, gender roles. Clint Eastwood is the quintessential man's man. Bill Murray, though I called him fit, has just enough extra flesh to him that some might call him effeminate. I wouldn't, but I have issues with constantly reifying the gender divide in order to make such points in the first place. The fact is, Bill Murray is not what anyone would use as a great example of masculinity. And his quest in Groundhog Day isn't particularly masculine either, according to Claire S. Baca, with whom I love to disagree. And according to Suzanne M. Doughton, with whom I take some issue but not as strongly. A masculine quest involves venturing out into the world to retrieve some external object, while a feminine quest involves turning inward towards some internal harmony. But, in this particular scene, Phil has dressed up in the costume of one of our great American masculine ideals, even though technically The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly could be termed an Italian film. And even goes so far as having his date, dressed in a particularly provocative and overtly sexualized feminine costume, call him not by his name, but by the much more masculine nickname Bronco. Phil has already demonstrated the time loop seduction method with Nancy Taylor. His presumed womanizing, presumed in the film version, more explicit in earlier drafts of the screenplay, has come to its climax. So he takes on the guise of what he has become, the ultimate male, even if the Man with No Name has no notable sex life. At least, not that I recall in those films. I've seen comments from people who think that scene is just weird, that it doesn't fit with the rest of the film, or it does, but only as a deliberate bit of eccentricity to demonstrate what kind of crazy shit Phil can get up to now that he's embraced his situation. But it is more than that, isn't it? It serves as the culmination of Phil's, for lack of a better description, his descent into masculinity. And in this light, his pursuit of Rita plays, I think, even less as a romantic pursuit than I've previously argued. Instead, it's a desperate attempt to cling to chauvinistic patriarchal standards by conquering the virginal princess. Phil is entrenching himself in the worst remnants of his life before the time loop, only to find that sometimes he still can't win. No matter how charming and improbably matched he can be to Rita, she still won't go to bed with him on the first date. At least, not until later when he is A, honest and forthcoming instead of manipulative, and B, remarkably lacking in ego. Doughton's suggestion that it is Phil's identification with the other that allows him to be free in the end makes for an interesting juxtaposition with this seemingly innocuous scene now. Phil here stands firmly on the side of patriarchy. And though he has come by his money dishonestly, he emerges from a fancy car firmly on the side, visually, of the haves, and not the have-nots. Of course, how many of the haves do we figure got their money honestly anyway? Though the more obvious structure of the film would put the first act ending with, say, the montage of slaps drifting into depression and death, perhaps it makes more sense to put Phil's pursuit of Rita entirely inside the second act. Then the first act is not just the setup and adolescent stage, but rather the presentation and upholding of the status quo, the world of the exploiter. Phil is not just one egocentric man representative of all of our various faults. He is the embodiment of our jointly constituted faults, the embodiment of the worst aspects not just of humans, but of humanity, willing to exploit any advantage. The second act is then not simply a response to the negative ending of the first, as it would be if the act break comes with the slaps, but a distinct journey unto itself of the exploiter being beaten down in the face of everything that has worked for him up to this point, coming to utter failure. So then, Phil's suicide is not so simple anymore either, but rather some revolutionary display of self-destruction on the part of the powers that be in modern society. Act 3 remains relatively the same, though perhaps the redemptive arc is on a grander scale now. Phil's dive off the Pennsylvanian hotel with arms out. I think I've avoided the comparison to Christ on the cross before, but now I would be remiss if I didn't suggest that it is entirely appropriate that Phil takes on now the guise of the Christ. His arc as man ended with him as the man with no name. His scrounging around in the mud in pursuit of sexual conquest ends with him emerging Christ-like through self-sacrifice into, surprise, surprise, the notion that he is a god. And the only specific reference to any religion comes in the God scene when Rita name-checks Catholicism.
You're not a god. You can take my word for it. This is 12 years of Catholic school talking.
So then, Groundhog Day serves not just metaphorically as our individual struggles with purpose and all the other nice stuff I've spent the last 2 months plus talking about, but also allegorically as our collective struggle with our cycle of exploitation and self-destruction. And all because I was stuck eating pizza when I didn't really want it. Well, not to imply that made the movie this way. But a long school day, a sore throat, and a little caffeine got me into a less rambling mood, even if I did have to get to my point in a roundabout fashion. A fatter Phil wouldn't serve this role as readily. But neither would a more physically fit Phil. It is vital that Phil be slightly unassuming, maybe even a little frumpy. The kind of guy you wouldn't notice if this were Bill Murray's first role. He isn't just an everyman because he represents each of us. He's an everyman because he represents all of us. And while we might wish we didn't have to worry about love handles or cholesterol or flossing, that's really not the point to the time loop, any more than being able to throw cards consistently into a hat is. Today's reason to repeat a day forever: to embrace every angle.
You were gonna say that.
This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. Also, you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops.
What is wrong in the end which never comes? Or it comes again and again, lapping, like waves.
Since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is. Particles unfolding the way they're destined to.
How do you sleep at night? You've never seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah, you know Groundhog Day is not a documentary.